Welcome to the African Weekly Roundup, a weekly program every Sunday here on HORUFADHI Media where I discuss the latest news and events across the African continent. I'm Sultan Mohammed, your host and producer here on HORUFADHI Media. We hope you find this program very informative. Please like, share, and for similar content, do subscribe to HORUFADHI Media. Also, do subscribe to HORUFADHI Media Group's second channel, known as HORUFADHI TV, where you are currently watching this program, and where you can find other exclusive programs such as Behind the Scenes and Mahahi Salah, among others. And last but not least, do follow myself, Sultan Mohammed, Salman Hashi, Yasin Abdi, and the wider HORUFADHI Media team and our social media platforms that should appear on the screen any moment. Let's get straight into the headlines, and we kick off in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where suspected Islamist militants killed at least 19 people and burned a medical facility in a raid on a village in the east of the DRC early on Sunday morning, according to local reports. The attack occurred around 1 a.m. in local time on the village of Kirindera in the North Kivu province and took place just a few kilometers from another attack on a village that killed at least 35 people last week. The army blamed last week's attack on the Allied Democratic Forces, or the ADF, a Ugandan armed group based in the eastern Congo that has pledged allegiance to the Islamic State group and conducts frequent raids on villages. A resident of a nearby village and a member of the local civil society blamed Sunday's attack on the ADF too. Gunfires were heard around Kirindera. The ADF arrived. They set fire to a hospital after looting it with medicines, and they set fire to a hotel, a resident told local media. He said the militants kidnapped several others who are now missing. The details of the burned buildings and the death toll were confirmed by two regional officials. Now, the ADF was created in Uganda before moving to eastern Congo in the 1990s and has been blamed for thousands of deaths in the last decade. Congo's government declared a state of siege in the North Kivu and neighboring Ituri province in 2021 in an attempt to stem rampant militia violence in the country's vast mineral-rich east. Now, the UN Refugee Agency said on Friday that it was greatly alarmed by clashes between government forces and armed groups in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo that has caused hundreds of thousands to flee. Speaking to reporters in Geneva, the UNHCR spokesman Matthew Saltmarsh said the violence had prompted nearly 300,000 people to flee across Rutshuru and Masisi territories of the DRC North Kivu province in February alone. Civilians continue to pay the heavy and bloody price of the conflict, including women and children who barely escaped the violence and are now sleeping out in the open air in spontaneous or organized sites, exhausted and traumatized, he said. Saltmarsh said the UNHCR and its partners were stepping up humanitarian assistance, but the difficulties remained in accessing displaced people in some parts of North Kivu because of the violence. Now, M23 rebels clashed with soldiers on two fronts in the eastern DRC. On Tuesday, officials said despite a regional ceasefire deal due to take effect on the same day, after several days of relative calm, fighting erupted on Monday of this week in the Flashpoint province of North Kivu, leaving several civilians dead and injured, hospital sources and aid workers have told local media. Now, fighting continued on Tuesday with rebels seizing new villages, despite a ceasefire brokered by Angola last week that was due to start at noon on Tuesday. Now, security sources who declined to be named told local media that about 30 kilometers west of Goma, the town of Karuba had fallen to M23 rebels. Witnesses said fighting continued to the north too, where rebels remained on the offensive. The renewed fighting coincided with an urgent appeal by the UN chief Antonio Guterres on Monday for M23 rebels to honor the ceasefire and move towards fully withdrawing from the conflict-ridden country. Now, despite the clashes, the M23 rebels on Tuesday sent a statement that they called an effective ceasefire at midday to open the way for direct dialogue with the Kinshasa government. Both sides accused the other of triggering the fresh round of clashes. M23 spokesman Willie Ngoma told AFP News on Tuesday that the group was defending itself against the army attack, all its positions simultaneously. Now, Lieutenant Colonel Njiga, the army spokesman in North Kivu, said late Monday the M23 rebels and their sponsors from the Rwandan Defense Forces had attacked a recently deployed Burundian contingent of an East African regional military force. Now, moving on to South Africa. Now, South Africa's anti-corruption watchdog has cleared President Cyril Ramaphosa of any wrongdoing in a preliminary report into a cover-up scandal that has tarnished his reputation, according to local media reports. Now, the public protector said it has notified implicated parties of the preliminary findings of its probe of the theft of large amounts of cash from Ramaphosa's luxury Falafala farm, something that the president is accused of having attempted to conceal. Now, Ramaphosa's spokesman said on Saturday that the president received the report, details of which have been leaked to the local media. Now, the scandal which erupted in June of last year involved about $500,000 in cash that Ramaphosa acknowledged was stolen from beneath sofa cushions at his ranch. The president, who said the money was payments for buffaloes bought by a Sudanese businessman, was accused of failing to report the matter to the police, as well as abusing his power and exposing himself to a conflict of interest over the affair. The report exonerates him, but found the head of the Presidential Protection Unit, to whom Ramaphosa reported the crime, acted improperly, investigating the case directly instead of reporting it to the police, according to extracts published by several media outlets. And the findings, which the left-wing Opposition Economic Freedom Fighters, or EFF party, described as nonsensical, will bring some respite to Ramaphosa, who has been dogged by allegations for months. Now, the scandal almost cost him his job in December when he narrowly escaped a parliamentary vote that could have initiated proceedings to remove him from office and has endangered his chances of securing a second term after the next year's elections. Yet, it will not be the end of the matter for the president. Now over to Mali, where Mali's transitional government said on Friday it will delay a constitutional referendum that has been set to take place this month, the first in a series of scheduled polls meant to restore democracy after military takeover in 2020. The government of Mali pledged to hold presidential elections in February 2024, following pressure from regional powers to lay out an acceptable democratic transitional timeline. The March 19 referendum on a new constitution has been seen as an indicator of the government's commitment to organizing polls on time, along with new electoral law passed in June of last year. But authorities on Friday said the referendum would be likely delayed. In a statement, they said they needed more time to get the Electoral Management Authority up and running in all of the country's 19 administrative regions. There was no mention of a new referendum date. In a statement said, the government reassures national and international opinion that a return to constitutional order remains one of its top priorities. The region's main economic and political bloc, ECOWAS, imposed stiff sanctions on Mali in January 2022 after the transitional authorities strayed from a previously agreed electoral calendar. After months of back and forth with Mali's military rulers, ECOWAS accepted a new 24-month transition that was to begin in March 2022. It lifted sanctions in July, but kept Mali suspended from the bloc. Now, ECOWAS has not commented on the latest delay announced by the Mali government. Now, Mali has been rocked by two coups since August 2022, spurred in part by frustration of the failure of authorities to block a violent Islamist insurgency that has spread across West Africa over the past decade. Now, military rulers have previously blamed election delays on insecurities, saying it made it very difficult to organize the polls quite effectively. Now, staying in West Africa, we move over to Mauritania, where 3 escaped detainees in the country have been killed and 1 other detained after a shootout with security forces, the Mauritanian authorities said on Saturday. Earlier this week, the 4 inmates escaped the central prison in the capital during a breakout in which 2 soldiers were killed by gunfire, according to the Interior Ministry. In a joint statement, the Defense and Interior Ministry said 3 of the 4 fugitives were killed when shooting broke out during a search operation conducted by the army and counter-terrorism forces. 1 officer was killed during the operation, the statement said. The authorities have not shared the identities of the escapees or said why they were in prison, referring to them only as terrorists. The arid West African country has been sparred the kind of violence unleashed by Islamist groups linked to Al-Qaeda and Islamic State group that has killed thousands of people in nearby countries in the Sahel region, including Mali. Now, Mauritania has not recorded an attack in years, but it shares a long border with Mali, where the group is relatively active. And finally, over to Washington, where U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is set to travel to Ethiopia next week, the State Department said on Friday, as concerns linger over the implementation of the peace agreement following the conflict in the Tigray region that left tens of thousands dead and millions uprooted. Now, the visit is set as Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed works to re-establish himself on the world stage following a 2-year war in Tigray, and comes as foreign troops remain within the region and bureaucratic hurdles hamper the humanitarian response. Now, Blinken will also visit Niger, a key U.S. security partner, during the trip. State Department spokesman Ned Price said in a statement, it will be the first ever to Niger by a U.S. Secretary of State. Now, Africa has emerged as a focus for Washington as it aims to position itself as a partner to countries in the region amid competition with China and Russia. Many African countries see America and the West as simply utilizing the continent rather than seeing it as a partnership, whereas China and Russia have expanded their influences by in one way funding infrastructure projects on the continent through China, or providing security partnerships through Russia, as we can see now in Mali, in Burkina Faso, in many of these West African countries, where Western countries like France and the UK or the United States are slowly being weeded out and being replaced by Russian and Chinese influences. Now, Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs Mali Fee told reporters Blinken is expected to meet with leadership of the Ethiopian government and the Tigrayans while in Ethiopia, where he will discuss the implementation of the ceasefire. Now, Fee said the relationship between Ethiopia and America were, and I quote, not back to normal following, and I quote, the earth-shattering conflict is what, as she described it. Now, policy experts believe that Blinken's trip comes as Ethiopia is lobbying the US to restore debt relief and financial assistance, as well as Ethiopia now deepening its conversation with China, which of course is concerning to the United States. And a travel to Niger by the Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, comes at a critical time for West Africa, where groups linked to Islamic State group and Al-Qaeda continue to carry out routine attacks on civilians and military despite costly intervention from international forces. And we've also seen, of course, tensions rising between key US allies such as France and West African countries, particularly in Mali. We see it in Burkina Faso. We're starting to see this appear across the region. And I guess the United States is there to discuss some of these matters as well. What began as a Mali-based insurgency in 2012 has since ballooned into a regional network of competing terrorist groups that operate across large areas of landlocked Niger, Burkina Faso, and beyond. The violence has killed thousands and displaced millions more over the last decade and 1 year. Now, that's the top stories on the African continent this week. Please tune in next week for further top stories across the African continent.